You feel pain like no other pain, and you know that in your life it's going to be very difficult to...
The silence inside Sandringham did not begin with a speech. It began with an invitation. A private succession briefing had been arranged for Prince William, senior aides, and Princess Anne. But when Anne's answer reached the room, the future king was left visibly stunned. She had not delayed. She had not asked for conditions. She had refused outright. And that single refusal changed the temperature of the monarchy. Before we go deeper into what this really means for the royal family, make sure to subscribe so you don't miss a single update. William stood with the sealed response in his hand, reading the words once, then again, as if the meaning might soften the second time. It did not. Anne had refused the private Sandringham succession briefing invitation, and the refusal landed harder than any argument could have. A succession briefing, in plain terms, is a private meeting where senior royals and trusted advisors discuss the future order of roles, duties, and authority inside the monarchy. This one had been arranged to prepare the next phase of royal continuity, and the prince had expected Anne's presence to signal calm, discipline, and family unity. Instead, her absence became the loudest voice in the room. The future king did not speak at first. His fingers tightened around the edge of the paper while the aides around him held their breath. Anne's decision was not treated like a scheduling issue, because everyone understood why it mattered. She was not a distant figure being asked for a polite appearance. She was one of the monarchy's hardest, most trusted servants, a woman whose approval could steady a room before anyone said a word. If she refused to attend, then something inside the plan no longer felt honest to her. And that was what struck William with such force. She had not rejected duty. She had rejected the way duty was being handled. A senior aide stepped forward and placed Anne's sealed response beside William's briefing folder. That small movement changed everything. The folder was meant to represent order, preparation, and control. Her note turned it into evidence of a deeper fracture. The prince looked from the response to the documents before him, and for the first time, he seemed to understand that Anne had not merely declined the meeting. She had refused the process behind it. Somewhere inside the planning, she believed the truth had been shaped, narrowed, or hidden before she was invited to give it her name. William folded the note slowly, but the room did not relax. The future king looked toward the aide who had delivered it and asked one question with a controlled voice. Who else knew Anne would refuse? No one answered quickly. That hesitation told him more than the response itself. Sandringham had not witnessed a minor disagreement. It had witnessed the first visible crack in a private succession plan, and to understand why that crack cut so deeply, the story had to move from the invitation itself to the people whose futures were suddenly exposed by it. Succession is never only about crowns, titles, or protocol. It is about family members forced to measure love against duty, loyalty against truth, and silence against survival. For William, the briefing represented stability. For Anne, it represented something more dangerous. And between them stood King Charles, a monarch watching two of the most disciplined figures in the family move toward a confrontation neither wanted. William believed the Sandringham briefing could steady the family before uncertainty spread beyond the walls. A briefing, in simple words, is a private meeting where trusted people are told what is coming and how they are expected to respond. To the prince, this meeting mattered because the monarchy could not afford confusion at the very moment its future was being quietly prepared. He needed Anne there because her presence carried weight. She was not loud. She did not perform loyalty. She lived it, and that made her refusal feel less like absence and more like judgment. Charles sat alone after the news reached him, one hand resting on the arm of his chair, his face unreadable but heavy with recognition. The king understood Anne too well to dismiss her refusal as pride. She had spent a lifetime choosing service over comfort, duty over attention, and discipline over drama. If she said no, then something had pushed her past patience. That was why the moment mattered. Anne's refusal did not threaten only one meeting. It threatened the trust that made the meeting possible in the first place. William felt the sting more personally than he wanted to admit. The future king had expected Anne to stand beside him when the family needed steadiness, and now her silence made him wonder whether she trusted his judgment at all. He did not say that aloud. He simply stared at the empty place her name had occupied on the schedule, knowing the space felt bigger than the table itself. Anne's absence suggested something painful. She believed the room had already decided too much before asking her to enter it. Camilla heard the update through a controlled palace message, and the queen consort understood instantly that this was not a calendar problem. She knew Anne was challenging more than a date, more than a chair, more than a private conversation. She was challenging the shape of authority around William. Camilla did not need a long explanation to sense the danger, because in royal life, refusals are rarely simple. They become signals, and this one had reached every person who mattered. Catherine asked William quietly whether Anne had given a reason. The prince did not answer right away, and that silence told her everything. The problem was not just the refusal, it was the missing explanation. Anne had left the family facing a locked door, and behind that door was an older wound Sandringham had failed to heal. Before William could understand the refusal, he would have to return to the hidden moment that turned Anne from loyal witness into immovable opposition. Every royal rupture has a beginning, but the beginning is rarely seen when it happens. Anne's refusal did not emerge from a single bad mood or a sudden disagreement. It traced back to one private moment weeks earlier, when a conversation behind closed doors made her believe the succession briefing was no longer about preparation. It was about control, and she had no intention of blessing it. Anne had been passing the Sandringham library when the voices inside made her stop. Sandringham, the royal family's Norfolk estate, matters because it is more than a country house. It is where private family decisions can harden into future royal direction before the public ever hears a word. Inside that late-night conversation, two senior advisors discussed how to streamline her role before the briefing. Streamline sounded polite, but to her it meant reduce, manage, and place her neatly inside a plan already moving without her. That was the trigger. Not gossip, not pride. A direct conversation overheard at the wrong door, at the wrong hour, with the right truth buried inside it. Anne stood still, as one advisor said William needed to leave Sandringham with clean authority. The phrase burned into her, because it sounded less like service and more like removal. Clean authority meant a future structure where the prince would appear supported by the whole family, even if the support had been shaped before anyone could question it. That mattered because the monarchy survives on visible unity, but it depends on private trust. If trust is broken behind closed doors, unity becomes theater, and Anne had never given her life to theater. Anne later brought the matter to Charles in a controlled private conversation, recorded in a palace note prepared for the king's office. She did not raise her voice. She did not plead. She told him plainly that she would not be used as decoration for decisions she did not help form. Charles listened without interrupting, and the monarch understood the danger at once. Anne was not refusing duty. She was refusing to let duty be used against her. Her warning carried weight, because she had spent decades proving she could carry burdens without complaint. The king asked whether she believed William knew how the briefing had been shaped. Anne did not answer quickly. That pause struck Charles harder than an accusation, because it revealed the deeper wound. She was not sure whether the prince had been misled, protected, or quietly carried along by advisors who wanted the meeting to look settled before it began. And once that doubt entered the room, nothing about the invitation could feel innocent again. Anne's refusal became her answer to that night. She would not sit at a table built to make silence look like consent. She would not let her name become a seal on a plan she had not trusted from the beginning. And when William finally learned about the library conversation, his shock did not fade. It hardened. The future king no longer needed another briefing. He needed to face Anne directly, because the refusal had been sent, the wound had been named, and Sandringham was moving toward the confrontation everyone had tried to avoid. When William entered the private sitting room, Anne was already there. No aides, no notes, no carefully arranged palace language. Just two royals bound by duty, separated by suspicion, and carrying generations of expectation in a room too quiet for comfort. William expected an explanation. Anne expected honesty. What followed was not a shouting match. It was worse. It was restraint breaking piece by piece. William had requested the meeting after learning that Anne's refusal was tied to the Sandringham library conversation. A private sitting room, in simple terms, is a smaller royal space used for personal talks, away from formal staterooms, and that mattered because this conversation could not survive the weight of witnesses. The prince needed to hear from Anne without advisors shaping every sentence. Anne agreed because she wanted him to understand the truth without palace language softening it, hiding it, or turning it into something easier to accept. This was no longer about one invitation. It was about whether trust still had a place in the family's future. William asked why she had refused him. Anne corrected him at once. She had refused the briefing, not the man. That difference struck the prince harder than anger, because her voice stayed calm, and calm meant she had already made peace with disappointing him. Anne did not lean on emotion. She leaned on truth. She told him the meeting had been designed to make her consent appear automatic, as though her presence alone would bless decisions she had not helped shape. William listened, but the wound was clear. He had entered the room feeling rejected. He was beginning to realize he may have been used. Anne explained that the phrase "clean authority" had changed everything for her. She said it sounded like a plan to clear the path around him, not strengthen the ground beneath him. William's face tightened because he understood the danger. If others had used his name to pressure Anne, then the briefing was not only flawed, it was dangerous. It made his future look less like earned leadership and more like managed approval. And for a future king, that kind of support can become poison if the people offering it are hiding the cost. William set his pen down slowly and admitted he had not seen the full wording of the pre-briefing plan. Anne watched him carefully, and for the first time, her controlled expression shifted. She was still hurt, but she saw the shock in him. The prince had not arrived to confess power. He had arrived to understand betrayal. That changed the air between them, but it did not heal the rupture. Not yet. Anne told him plainly that authority built on silence would fail him when he needed loyalty most. William did not argue. He looked at the closed folder between them and understood the real question was no longer why Anne had refused. The real question was, who had shaped the succession meeting before he ever entered the room? Power in a palace rarely announces itself. It moves through calendars, seating plans, briefing papers, and phrases polished until they sound harmless. William had believed the Sandringham briefing was a tool of unity. Anne saw it as a trap of procedure. Now Charles was forced to examine the machinery around him, and what he found made the room feel smaller than it had in years. Charles sat with the planning notes spread before him, but one phrase held his attention longer than the rest: expected family alignment. Alignment, in simple terms, meant everyone appearing united behind the same plan, even if private doubts had not been settled. That mattered, because the monarchy depends on trust behind closed doors before it can show calm in public. The king understood why Anne would see the wording as pressure, not preparation. She had not been invited to shape the moment. She had been expected to complete it. William's role had been placed at the center of the briefing, but not every detail had reached him before Anne received the invitation. That discovery cut deeply, because the prince had believed he was asking for support, not allowing others to stage it around him. The advisors had treated his future authority like something that could be arranged through perfect timing and controlled optics. But authority does not become strong because people sit in the right seats. It becomes strong when the people in those seats believe the process is honest. Camilla watched Charles close the folder without saying a word. The queen consort knew his silence was not weakness. It was disappointment. She had seen the king carry heavy decisions before, but this was different, because the wound had come from inside the system meant to protect him. Charles had trusted the planning circle to prepare a steady path for William. Instead, the monarch now saw how easily polished language could turn family loyalty into public theater. A briefing draft revealed the detail that confirmed Anne's fear. Her seat had been placed beside William, close enough to create the image of endorsement after a private disagreement. A seating arrangement, in plain words, is the planned placement of people at a formal meeting, but inside royal life it can send a message before anyone speaks. Anne's chair was not just a chair, it was a symbol. It would have told everyone she stood with the plan before she had agreed to the plan itself. Charles read that part again, and the room seemed to tighten around him. The king now understood why Anne had refused so sharply. Her presence had been designed to speak for her. Her silence had been expected to serve someone else's message. That was not duty. That was control disguised as order. And if William's authority began with that kind of hidden pressure, then the future king would inherit not confidence, but doubt. William soon learned what Charles had found, and the prince's anger shifted direction. Anne was no longer the center of the problem. The hidden hands behind the meeting were. Charles now had to choose between protecting the planned briefing or admitting that her refusal had exposed a serious breach of trust. That choice did not stay inside the folder for long, because the fallout began the moment Sandringham's schedule was changed. By morning, the palace machine had slowed. Aides who once moved with certainty now exchanged clipped looks in corridors. The Sandringham briefing was no longer a quiet preparation session. It had become a test of who still trusted whom. William wanted control restored. Anne wanted the truth acknowledged. Charles wanted damage contained. But the first visible consequence came when the original briefing was quietly dismantled. Charles ordered the original Sandringham succession briefing postponed before the day could gather momentum. Postponed, in simple words, meant delayed and removed from the immediate schedule, but inside royal life, even a delay can send a warning. The king knew this mattered because a compromised briefing could not create unity. It would only make the monarchy look controlled from the outside and divided from within. He also understood that pushing forward without Anne would make her refusal look even stronger, and pushing forward with her doubts ignored would make William's authority look fragile before it had fully settled. William agreed to the delay, but the decision cost him. The prince had wanted order restored quickly, because uncertainty spreads fast when senior royals begin questioning private plans. Yet he knew the briefing could no longer proceed cleanly. The guest list had to be withdrawn for review, and a guest list, in plain terms, is the approved group of people invited to attend a private royal meeting. In this case, the names mattered because each person in that room would shape the future message of the monarchy. One wrong presence, one forced symbol, one hidden motive, and the whole meeting would become theater again. Catherine found William before breakfast, standing in silence, carrying the weight of a man forced to question his own advisors. She did not rush him. She knew the future king was not simply angry at Anne anymore. He was wounded by the idea that loyalty around him may have been arranged instead of earned. Catherine asked softly whether he trusted the revised process. William looked away before answering, and that hesitation told her the damage had already reached deeper than the schedule. Anne received word of the postponement without triumph. She did not celebrate. She sat still, knowing the delay proved how serious the matter had become. Her refusal had worked, but victory was not what she wanted. Anne had never wanted to embarrass William. She wanted the truth admitted before the monarchy walked into a room pretending nothing was wrong. Charles then removed one aide from the immediate planning circle after demanding to know who approved the language, implying Anne's automatic support. The king's decision sent a quiet shock through the household. A planning circle, in simple terms, is the small group trusted to prepare sensitive royal decisions before they reach the family. Removing someone from it mattered because it showed the breach was not symbolic. It had consequences. A revised note was prepared for Anne, and this time the wording changed. It did not command attendance. It asked for counsel. That difference opened a narrow path back toward trust, but only if William was willing to meet Anne without the protection of palace machinery. With the briefing pulled apart and the old plan exposed, the story moved into its most delicate phase. 2 people, 1 room, and no one left to hide behind. The turning point did not arrive with an announcement. It arrived in a smaller room, away from the formal table, where William and Anne sat without advisors, files, or carefully scripted phrases. For the first time since the refusal, the future king was not asking for compliance. He was asking for the truth. And Anne, who had spent a lifetime choosing duty over comfort, finally gave it to him plainly. William had invited Anne to a private conversation, with no aides present, and that choice mattered more than any official note. A private conversation, in simple terms, means a direct exchange without staff shaping the words or controlling the outcome. The prince wanted Anne to know this was not another attempt to pull her back into the same broken process. He was not asking her to endorse a plan. He was asking her to explain what had gone wrong, before the monarchy made the same mistake again. Anne agreed, because the revised approach finally respected her judgment. She had refused the first invitation because it treated her reputation like a shield for decisions already shaped around William. Now the tone had changed. The prince was no longer standing behind palace machinery. He was sitting in front of her, as family, as heir, and as a man forced to admit that the room around him had not been as honest as he believed. That difference softened something in Anne, though it did not erase what had happened. William admitted the truth that had been sitting between them from the start. He felt humiliated by the refusal. The prince said it plainly, without dressing it in royal language. Anne listened, then answered that humiliation is sometimes the cost of seeing a broken process clearly. Her words struck him because they were not cruel. They were steady. She wanted him to understand that pain can protect a future ruler if he learns from it before power teaches him the harder way. Anne told William that succession could not be secured by choreography. Succession, in plain words, is the planned passing of royal duty and authority from one generation to the next. That mattered because the monarchy's future could not rest on perfect seating, polished phrases, or silent family members placed in the right position. It had to rest on trust, especially from those who knew the family's history, its wounds, and its mistakes. Anne had seen too much to confuse appearance with loyalty. William asked whether she would attend a future briefing if it was rebuilt from the beginning. Anne did not rush her answer. She said she would consider it only if counsel came before conclusion. Counsel, in simple terms, means honest advice given before a decision is final, not after the decision has already been wrapped in ceremony. The prince understood the condition. Anne was not demanding control. She was demanding respect. That answer was not full forgiveness, but it gave William something Sandringham had lost: a path forward based on honesty. Anne had not returned to obedience. She had returned to purpose. And inside the palace, that private understanding mattered deeply. But outside its walls, the public saw only one explosive fact: Anne had refused William. By the time the story reached the outside world, the nuance had been stripped away. The public did not see the revised note, the private conversation, or William's quiet admission. They saw one stunning headline: Anne had refused a Sandringham succession briefing invitation. And in that single sentence, people found everything they already feared about the monarchy: tension, transition, loyalty, and hidden power. The palace released a controlled statement before speculation could grow beyond its reach. The message said the Sandringham succession briefing had been rescheduled for further consultation. A controlled statement, in simple words, is an official message carefully written to reveal only what the palace wants the public to know. That mattered because the wording avoided Anne's refusal directly, yet confirmed something serious had happened. Further consultation meant the old plan had failed. Rescheduled meant the family could no longer pretend the original meeting was strong enough to stand. William watched the coverage in silence as broadcasters turned the moment into a test of his future authority. The prince heard one presenter call it the first major internal challenge to the next reign, and the words landed hard because they were simple enough for the public to understand. If Anne had refused, people would ask why. If the briefing had been delayed, people would ask who lost control. William knew the danger was no longer private. The wound had moved from Sandringham's rooms into every living room, watching the story unfold. Anne saw the newspaper front page outside a Windsor shop, and the headline was brutal: Anne says no at Sandringham. She did not smile. She did not look pleased. Her expression stayed firm, because she understood the cost of being turned into a symbol. The public saw defiance, but Anne knew the truth was heavier. She had refused, because silence would have been easier, and easier would have been wrong. That was why the moment mattered. Her decision had protected honesty, but it had also exposed the family's pain. A morning broadcaster framed the refusal as not a family quarrel, but a warning about how the next reign will be managed. That sentence cut through the palace like a blade. It gave the public a simple story. William wanted order, Anne demanded trust, and Charles had been forced to stop the machine before it moved too far. The king understood that the monarchy could not answer this with soft language alone. It needed action. It needed proof that Anne's refusal had changed something real. A small crowd gathered near Sandringham's gates, as cameras searched for meaning in every face. One elderly woman told a reporter, if Anne refused, she had a reason. That single line carried the public mood better than any panel discussion. People did not see Anne as reckless. They saw her as someone who would only say no when no had become necessary. And that made the palace's problem even sharper. Public reaction forced the family to accept what private rooms had already revealed. The refusal could not be buried, softened, or explained away. It had to be answered through action. And so the monarchy reached its final test. Not whether Anne would be silenced, but whether William would learn from the moment that shocked him. In the end, Anne's refusal was not an act of destruction, it was an act of warning. She did not reject William's future. She rejected a process that tried to turn loyalty into theater. And William, shocked at first, emerged with a harder but clearer understanding of power. Sandringham had not weakened the monarchy by exposing tension. It had strengthened it by forcing honesty before ceremony. William returned to the next meeting, changed by what had happened. The original succession briefing was officially replaced by a new consultation process. And that mattered, because this time Anne was not invited as a symbol. She was invited as an active voice. A consultation process, in simple terms, means a discussion where advice is gathered before final decisions are made. For the prince, that difference marked a painful lesson. Authority could not simply be arranged around him. It had to be trusted by the people asked to stand beside him when the pressure became impossible to hide. Charles spoke to William privately before the new meeting began, and the king did not dress the truth in soft language. He told him Anne's refusal hurt because it was honest. That sentence stayed between them. The monarch understood the cost of admitting weakness inside a family built on discipline, but he also knew why the moment mattered. If the monarchy ignored honest pain, it would only create quieter damage later. William finally nodded without defending the old plan, and that nod became the first real sign that the shock had turned into understanding. Anne attended the later private consultation, but not as a surrender. She came because respect had been restored. The consultation, in plain words, was now a serious family discussion about future duty, not a performance designed to make decisions look complete. Anne's presence mattered because she had refused when refusal was necessary, and she returned only when the process deserved her name again. She did not need victory. She needed proof that the family had listened. The final change was small, but it carried the weight of everything that had happened. Anne was seated across from William, not beside him for display. The seating choice made one thing clear. Counsel now came before optics. Optics, in simple words, means how something looks to others, even before the truth behind it is known. This time, no one tried to use Anne's presence as decoration. No one placed her close to the prince to send a message she had not approved. Her seat told the truth before anyone spoke. William opened the meeting himself, and his voice carried a steadier weight than before. The prince acknowledged that the monarchy could not survive on obedience alone. It survived when truth was still allowed in the room. Anne listened without interrupting, and Charles understood that the future had shifted. The refusal that once stunned William had become the correction he needed. Anne's refusal became the shock William needed, the correction Charles could not ignore. And the moment Sandringham remembered that succession is not only about who comes next, it is about how they choose to lead. There is no unfinished ending here. Anne refused, William listened, Charles adjusted, and the monarchy walked away bruised but wiser. Thanks for watching. Please don't forget to like and subscribe, and we will see you in next one.